good to see you all this morning in worship. I'm excited as we start the third sermon in the series, I Hope. And I especially want to welcome those who are on the other side of the camera, who watch us every week from wherever they are in our country. And we have people I know in Minnesota and in Texas and New Mexico and Oregon and around this country, besides our own people who watch us every week because we do our services online as well. The first sermon on the I Hope series was on Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, and I reminded us that Easter was a 3-day event, that in the midst of the darkness of Saturday came the deliverance of an empty tomb on Resurrection Sunday. Then last week I talked about what happens when we have Plan A, and Plan A dies, and we don't know what to do about Plan B. We talked about the two men on the road to Emmaus and how Jesus met with them and the hope that he gave them. Today I want to talk about hope when we face loss. And I just want to say, it's not in my sermon notes, but I'm really privileged today. I have some friends who are in worship with us, and I just want to say, if you are a person who has suffered a loss, and you're struggling with your grief. I have a friend of mine who's in worship, and they happen to be the leader of Grief Share in Garden City at another church. And I will put you in contact with them. I don't want to embarrass them and make them, normally I would embarrass them. Let's just be honest. They know me well enough I would do that, but I'm not going to do that today. But if you are needing to talk to somebody about grief, and want to consider going to the Grief Share group that she leads, it's a powerful thing. I'd be happy to get you connected, okay? Just say that right off the bat, okay? So have you ever watched your kids on Christmas Day, and they're opening their presents, and they keep opening and opening and opening them, and they're all excited, and all of a sudden they open up, one, and it's a sweater. And they're going, I was hoping for a toy. I was hoping for a toy. And you see the disappointment on their face. And you hear their little flustered voice as they say, I was hoping for. What about you women? You've laid all the hints out to your husband about Mother's Day. By the way, it's just a couple weeks away, men. And I'll keep reminding you so that we won't forget it. You've laid those hints out about the perfect shoes that you want, the style and the color and everything that you want. And lo and behold, your husband gets you a Jenny Craig cookbook. The disappointment that you would have. Or you men who have been hinting that you want a new iPhone. And your wife hands you a box and it's just the right size for an iPhone. And you open it up and you discover nose hair clippers. Imagine the disappointment. We all have faced disappointment. We often don't get what we want, but often we get what we need. It's a tough lesson to learn in life that we're not going to get everything we want. And we need to convey that in every way possible to our young people, because I know some of them particularly because they're dreamers. And I love dreamers. Trust me, I want our kids to dream. I love it when our kids dream. I also want them to understand they're not going to get everything that they want. Sooner or later, we're going to learn the experience of a loss of a job or of a dream or of health or of friendship or a marriage, of a spouse, or worse yet, the loss of a child. Today we're going to spend some time in a fabulous book in the Old Testament. And I want you to turn, if you want to use the Bibles that are in the pews, it's page 399. It's the book of Ruth. It's snuggled between Judges and 1 Samuel. Is this beautiful little book. It's called Ruth. And I want to begin, it's not in your bulletin, but I want to set the scene so you can get the picture. I want to read the first 5 verses of the first chapter of the book of Ruth. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the sons of his 2 children were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, here we are, we're not but 3 verses in, okay? But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, dies. And she was left with her 2 sons. They took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion dies. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. All right. Point number 1. Ruth is a story of great loss. It's a story of great loss. This story is for every one of us who has ever suffered a loss. It's just sometimes can be overwhelming. So there's a famine in Israel, and Elimelech and his wife and his 2 sons, they go to Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. I'm going to share, you're going to learn a little bit of Hebrew today, by the way, just want to let you know. The man's name was Elimelech, which means my God is king. Elimelech means my God is king. And honestly, he didn't live up to his name because he didn't trust that God would provide for him. So he takes his family and he moves to a foreign land. And his wife's name is Naomi, which means pleasant or sweet. And their 2 sons, I'm not making this up, Mahlon and Chilion, they move with him. Their names mean sick and dying. I doubt that many of you are naming your children Chilion. You just can't make this stuff up. They married 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. Now, I just want to tell you, and I've told you this before, Oprah Winfrey was supposed to be named Orpah. True story. Supposed to be named Orpah after this lady in the book of Ruth. But her mother misspelled her name on her birth certificate. So she became Oprah Winfrey instead of Orpah Winfrey. We're only gone 2 paragraphs in, and tragedy has struck Naomi and Ruth and Orpah. And that's letter A. Tragedy strikes when we least expect it. Elimelech, her husband, dies, and her 2 sons, sick and dying, die as well. It just cracks me up that that's what their names mean. They leave 3 widows to cling to each other. Their pain is so much. I just can't imagine what it would be like to lose your husband and then both of your sons. Many of you have faced similar tragedies in life. Some of you may be experiencing a loss right now. And that pain is palpable. In fact, this is a sermon that is pretty raw for you. And I want to be as sensitive as I can about it. Because I know that loss can be excruciating. Naomi decides there's nothing left for her to do. So she decides to go back home. And she urges her daughters-in-law to stay there because they're Moabites. Orpah stays, but Ruth says, no, I'm going to go with you. And here's this awesome passage, and I don't think I put it in the outline, but make a note, Ruth 1, 16 and 17. Let me read it for you. You hear this often read at weddings. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death departs from you. What a great passage. Ruth is saying, Naomi, wherever you go, I'm going to go with you. Number two, and I have made a mistake in the outline, so this is not, please understand, you need to cross out the name Ruth. Cross out the name Ruth and put in the name Naomi. Naomi goes back to her roots, not Ruth. There's nothing to keep her any longer in Moab. So Ruth says, let's go on an adventure. Now, I know some of us in the room are homebodies. Our idea of an adventure is going to the TV room to watch TV. Some of you have never taken a vacation. Some of you have never gone on trips. Others of you have gone all the time, traveling wherever. Everybody is different. Brenda's parents were not travelers. They never saw the ocean in their entire life. They lived in Wichita. Their idea of a vacation was to paint the siding on the house. That was their idea of a vacation. Brenda and I have traveled all over the country, even went to Australia for a few years. We enjoy traveling, but everybody's different. So here's point A. Don't be afraid to take an adventure. So Naomi and Ruth go to Naomi's hometown. Do you remember what that hometown was? Bethlehem. Just a little side note, another little Hebrew thing here. Bethlehem means house of bread. Now, if you have a daughter or a granddaughter and you call her Beth, I want you to know you are calling her house. Just letting you know, that's what Beth means. It means house. Now, they're not going back to a big city. They're going back to Bethlehem. They suspect in that time there might have been 200 people in the town of Bethlehem. Hence the song, O Little Town of Bethlehem. It was a little town. 200 people. Today's world, it would be a town with one flashing light, a convenience store, a couple of churches, and a few houses. And if it's in western Kansas, it's got to have a grain elevator somewhere. Small town, it's rural, but it's home to Naomi. And that is crucial to know that she was going home. But I want to tell you a little bit more about Naomi. Naomi is really ticked off at God. She is really angry with God. And that's point B. She's angry with God. So I want to read Ruth 1, 20 to 21. You have it there in your outline. she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi." What did Naomi mean? Sweet or pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. She's changing her name. "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Don't call me sweet anymore. Call me bitter." Because God did not provide for her and Elimelech, so they moved. He didn't take care of them because Elimelech and the two sons died. And she's left with no husband, no children, no house, no land. And if she wanted to play on the fiddle of disappointment, she certainly could. And so can you. Many of you are sitting here saying to yourselves, "That's my story. I've had loss and I've been disappointed and I'm angry at God too." And I tell people all the time as I counsel with them at a funeral, God understands you're angry. God understands that. But I want to tell you, it doesn't have to be that way. Naomi had a loss. But the story doesn't have to end with the loss and the focus on the lost. And neither does your story and my story have to focus on the disappointments of our life. Gerald Sitzer is a retired professor from a college in Washington. And he has a wonderful book called Grace Disguised. He writes about losing 3 generations of his family in one moment. He lost his mother, his wife, and his daughter in a tragic car accident. In the blink of an eye, they were gone. They were hit by a drunk driver and gone forever. But here's what he writes, and it's in your outline. The experience of loss does not need to be the defining moment of our story. Let me just say that again. The experience of loss does not need to be the defining moment of our story. The defining moment can be our response to the lost. We don't always get to choose the details of our story, but we do get to choose how we respond to them. We all reach that time in our life when we have to decide, are we going to let the loss define us, or is my life going to be defined by how I respond to it? Could there be something more? Could something happen that would make me get over the fact that I got nose hair clippers for Christmas? If there's one word that describes the complete story of the book of Ruth and the journey of Ruth and Naomi, it's one word, and that word is redemption. And that's point number 3. The story becomes a story of redemption rather than about loss. The story becomes a story of redemption rather than about loss. Now, I want to tell you, God is working behind the scenes of this wonderful, wonderful love story. And that's letter A. So here we have Ruth and Naomi. They go back to her hometown, to Bethlehem. And we don't know what Ruth ever did for a living and as a Moabite, but she goes out and gets her a job. Amen for that. There was a very interesting law in Israel that said that all of the farmers, they needed to leave the edges of their fields unharvested, so the poor people of the community, they took care of their poor people. The poor people could come by and harvest their grain and have some grain. So here is Ruth picking up the grain in the field of our next character, and his name is Boaz. Boaz was a godly man who had never chosen to marry. Some of you in this room have never chosen to marry. Some of you may have made that decision because you were disillusioned by some of the marriages that you observed, or you had just not found the right person, or maybe you just chose to be single, and 1 Corinthians 7, Paul addresses the fact that those who choose to be single need to be honored for that decision. Here's what Ruth 2:3 says. I'm going to read it in the New International Version. So she went out, entered the field, and began to glean behind the harvesters on the edge of the field. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Her father-in-law, Elimelech, from the same clan. So she's working on the edges of the field, and there's a great line. I want to repeat it for you. There's a reason I chose the NIV, because it has this great line. It says, as it turned out. Have you ever had one of those moments when it was as it turned out? All of a sudden, things are changing in your life. Sometimes we call them, coincidentally, it's just by coincidence this happened. Well, I just want to quote that great scholar, Leroy Jethro Gibbs, on NCIS, who says, there's no such thing as coincidences. If you don't watch NCIS, you don't have a clue what I'm talking about, but that's all right. You need to watch it. It's on Monday night. And they got 20 years of reruns on 18 other channels, so you can catch up on it. But that's what he says. No such thing as coincidences. God is working behind the scenes in the life of Naomi and Ruth, and he's working there in a powerful way, and he's working behind the scenes in our life, even in the time of loss. And that's what you need to understand. The story begins to shift. So here she is. She's working in the fields, and Boaz spots her. And he wants to know, who's that young lady over there? And Naomi gets word, and so she begins to play Cupid. So she says to Ruth, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to where Boaz is sleeping. This is where he's going to be sleeping. I want you to go where he's sleeping, and I want you to put your mat at his feet, and I want you to sleep at his feet. Now, some of you are saying, oh, this is a hookup. I don't want you to go away thinking this is God's hookup. This is not a hookup at all. Okay. In fact, I'm going to read it for you. Ruth 3, 8-11. I'm going to read it in the Living Bible. Listen to this. Suddenly around midnight, he wakes up and sat up, and he startled her. There was a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He demanded. It is I, sir, Ruth, she replied. Make me your wife according to God's law, for you are my close relative. Thank God for a girl like you, he exclaimed, for you are being even kinder to Naomi now than before. Naturally, you prefer a younger man, even though poor, but you have put aside your personal desires. Now, don't worry about a thing, my child. I'll handle all the details, for everyone knows what a wonderful person you are. Point B. Boaz becomes, some translations say kinsman redeemer. I'm going to say guardian redeemer. So here's the law. Elimelech dies. Mahlon and Chilion die. So, by law, the brother has to marry the widow if he's not married. Now, Boaz is a little sneaky guy. Boaz is not next in line. There's a brother in the picture. They're obligated they're responsible. You need to get this picture. They're responsible to take on this obligation. Boaz is not next in line, but he wants to marry Ruth. So he says to the brother, I'll tell you what, I'll take care of all of them. I know you're next in line, but if you want, I'll take that obligation off of you. I'll buy the property. I'll take care of Naomi. I'll marry Ruth. I'll take care of all of them. I will even marry Ruth, and you need to understand this picture too, who is a Moabitess. She's not, in a Jewish mind, she's not clean. She's a foreigner. She's unacceptable. But Boaz says, I will love those who you will not love. I will redeem the one you will not redeem. Boaz is a close relative, but certainly not under obligation to do this. He does it out of grace, not out of obligation. So I want to ask you, what kind of man do you think Boaz was? I'm going to tell you. He was ruthless. I've waited all week to say that, and you don't even get the joke. You'll get it about 3 o'clock. Oh, that's what he meant. Oh, okay. This is where the story really gets great. So I want you to hang with me for just a few minutes more. So I want you to see the importance of how this tragic story works out. Go back in the Old Testament. Remember when the spies went into the promised land? Who helped them? Do you remember who helped them? Rahab the harlot. A harlot. You talk about the wrong kind of person. It was Rahab the harlot that helped the spies. But God used Rahab in a powerful way. Here's where the story of redemption gets even better. Rahab is Boaz's mother. Wow. Boaz is born from a woman many in our world would find unacceptable. He then marries Ruth, who's a Moabitess. Again, someone who's unacceptable. And they have a son named Obed. Now, I've been trying to tell you in these last few minutes how God works behind the scenes to bring redemption out of loss. So I want to tie it all together. You have a row of blanks in your outline, side by side by side by side. I want to fill in the blanks, and I want you to get the picture of how God uses amazing people. Sometimes people you would least think that he would use to be a part of his redemption story. So the first blank, fill in the word Rahab. The next one is Boaz. The next one, Obed. Obed. The next one, Jesse. That's his son. Who did Jesse have for a son? King David. And eventually, out of that line, the line that involves a harlot and a Moabite from a foreign land, comes Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of the world. Through Jesus Christ, we find redemption. He became the Redeemer of the entire world. Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz all show how to experience loneliness and loss. And they came out on the other side because they did not let it define them. And I want to assure you, no matter what the loss is in your life or the loneliness that you feel, you do not need to let it define you. You need to let the Redeemer, Jesus Christ, define you. And he calls us his children. This is the same Jesus Christ who looked upon the people and he said, "Come all who are labor, and I will give you rest." We have a God who wants to redeem us. Very simple conclusion today. We need a daily relationship with our guardian Redeemer, that is Jesus Christ, to help us through times of loss. We need a daily relationship with our guardian Redeemer, with our Redeemer, Jesus Christ, who helps us through times of loss. We're going to sing a song of decision today. It's called Overcome. It's by Phil Wickham. I want to invite all of you, whether you are going through a time of loss